Can a single reaction really change the way you play a Defender in Pathfinder? With the Redemption Champion, the answer is absolutely yes. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why enemies start thinking twice before they ever raise a weapon. What if one choice at character creation, one reaction you might have just dismissed as defensive, could turn your character into the center of every fight? Not because they hit the hardest, not because they wear the heaviest armor, but because every enemy action now comes with consequences. That's exactly what the Redemption Champion does. And in today's build, the original Defender, we're gonna see how it combines shield mastery, battlefield positioning, and pressure to create a character who doesn't just absorb damage, but decides who's allowed to deal it in the first place. Welcome to Ctrl+Alt+Build, where we control the dice, alt the meta, and build the legend. Here, I deep dive into Pathfinder 2e character builds, sometimes inspired by new options, sometimes built around a specific party role, but always focus on making something thematic, intentional, and ready for the table. So if you enjoy understanding why a build works, discovering how mechanics can change the flow of play, or simply finding inspiration for characters that matter both in combat and in story, you're in the right place. So let's raise the shield and step forward. We'll start at level 1, where the champion takes their oath, claims their ground, and begins learning what it truly means to stand between danger and the people who trust them. Alright, before we touch individual mechanics, let's define the intent. The original Defender is built to occupy space, absorb pressure, and reshape enemy behavior, not through damage spikes, but through consequences. The primary party role here is Defender. We're talking proactive damage prevention, frontline control, and reaction-based punishment. But this build also picks up two strong secondary roles: support through persistent mitigation and ally protection, and the face through social authority and diplomacy. Some other roles are still scored and represented visually, but these three emerge early and intentionally. From the very start, this build makes its priorities clear. Strength is pushed high to ensure the champion is a credible frontline presence, someone enemies can't just ignore. Constitution is going to fuel our survivability here, and that in turns lets us stay in the fight longer to keep using our reactions. Dexterity and charisma are there, but they're secondary, enough to support initiative, saves, and social authority without compromising the core role. The exact numbers here matter less than the message. This character is built to stand, endure, and be listened to. By the end of this tier, the build can reduce or negate damage every round, force enemies into lose-lose decisions, establish frontline presence without sacrificing actions, and begin exerting influence both in combat and in conversation. This is the moment where the Defender stops being theoretical and becomes reliable. For our core Defender pieces, these choices are non-negotiable. Remove them, and our build stops functioning as intended. At character creation, this build locks in three structural decisions. First, human for early feat access and teamwork scaling. Second, Squire, which reinforces both the narrative and gives you early armor support. And 3, Champion, because this role demands reaction-based protection from level 1. These aren't just thematic picks, they make sure everything's working before the first combat even starts. Choosing Akavana, the fallen god known as the Shield, and taking the Redemption cause defines how this Defender operates. This is not a champion who punishes aggression, it's one who weaponizes restraints. This is the core of the build. Glimpse of Redemption isn't just a reaction, it's a behavioral control mechanic. When an enemy damages an ally in your aura, they're forced to choose: repent and deal no damage at all, or refuse and deal reduced damage while suffering a debilitating condition. Mechanically, this does several critical things at once. Damage prevention happens before it fully resolves, the effect scales automatically with level, even successful enemy attacks here will feel inefficient, and poor targeting decisions get punished immediately. Most importantly though, it changes how enemies approach the fight. Creatures quickly learn that attacking anyone near you is a bad decision, and that shift in enemy behavior is the heart of what makes this a true defender. Shield block is expected, where Blessed Shield is what gives it its dependability. Shield block gives you reaction-based damage reduction and control over how much punishment you personally absorb. Blessed Shield ensures your shield's hardness scales and your primary defensive tool never falls too far behind. And you don't have to chase gold or runes just to stay relevant. Together, these turn your shield into a reliable resource, not a deposable buffer. You aren't avoiding hits, you're enduring them round after round. Defensive Advance solves one of the biggest early game defender problems, action economy. It lets you raise your shield, stride into position, and make a strike, all without losing tempo. This means you don't have to choose between being a defender and a presence. You claim space immediately. You're protected before enemies can exploit openings. This is why the build feels proactive, not just reactive. Oath of the Defender is where the build stops protecting itself and starts protecting the party. By swearing an oath during daily preparations, allies in your aura gain resistance against a chosen enemy type. That resistance stacks cleanly with Glimpse of Redemption, and the benefit scales naturally as you level. In practice, you've become a mobile damage reduction zone. At this point in the story, the champion understands something most warriors never do. Defense isn't about standing still, it's about making your presence unavoidable. Every reaction, every raised shield, every moment an enemy hesitates. That's Akavana's legacy made real. Not a god protecting from above, but a mortal choosing to stand where harm wants to happen. Redemption is always offered once, but after that, judgment follows, not in anger, but in certainty. This isn't a character who protects because they crave glory. They protect because someone has to take responsibility for the outcome. And now, mechanically and narratively, they can. These selections deepen the build's identity and smooths out how it's going to play at the table. Weight of Guilt reframes refusal. Instead of enfeebling enemies who ignore redemption, you can make them stupefied. Mechanically, it pressures spellcasters and tacticians, weakens will-based actions and spells, and adds some soft control without extra actions or positioning. Narratively, Defiance clouds the mind. Guilt lingers longer than pain. It's subtle, but it's always relevant. Cooperative Nature gives you a +4 circumstance bonus to aid, which is pretty enormous in play. Aid checks succeed consistently more, allies land attacks more often, and the party performs better when you're involved. This directly reinforces the support role and fits a defender who thrives through unity, not isolation. Incredible Initiative is close to critical here because defenders who act late are already behind. Going early lets you establish aura positioning immediately, claim space before enemies can exploit it, and set the tone of the encounter from round 1. Because ultimately, protection only matters if it's there in the first place. You're going to see all of the roles here scored visually on the screen, but we're going to focus on our top 3. Defender comes in at a 5 out of 6. It's fully online at level 1, stabilized hard by level 5. Support sits at a 4 out of 6 with persistent mitigation and party-wide survivability. And Face lands at a 3 out of 6 with reliable diplomacy and social authority. By level 5, this champion had already proven they could protect the party simply by standing in the right place. Tier 2 of the build asks a harder question. What happens when the defender's presence doesn't just protect a few allies, but starts shaping the entire battlefield? In this tier, the original defender doesn't change roles. Instead, the build widens its influence. Defender remains the priority, support strengthens significantly, and Face transitions from competent to reliable authority. This is the tier where the defender stops guarding a point and starts defining space. By the end of this tier, the build can protect allies across a much larger area, block damage multiple times per round, respond faster and reposition more effectively, and influence both combat encounters and urban investigations. This is where the defender stops reacting and starts controlling. So what are our must-have selections? These picks are what allow the build to scale forward without losing its identity. Expand Aura is the most important pickup of Tier 2. It directly increases the radius of your champion's aura to 30 feet and by level 10, it lasts for a full minute instead of a single round. Mechanically, more allies benefit from Glints of Redemption, Oath of Defender applies to a wider area, and you are no longer needing perfect positioning to protect the party. It's in this moment where the Defender stops being a single point shield and becomes a zone of protection. In practical play, casters can spread out, skirmishers can reposition, and enemies can't simply walk around you to bypass the protection. This feat fundamentally changes encounter geometry. Quick shield block here defines endurance. This feat grants an additional reaction every turn usable only for shield block. This means you can use shield block more than once per round. You no longer have to choose between Glimpse of Redemption and personal defense, and your durability becomes consistent instead of situational. This is a massive survivability increase, especially in multi-attacker encounters. At this point, the Defender isn't just hard to kill, they're becoming hard to wear down. Second Blessing, Blessed Swiftness, unlocks a new axis of protection. It provides a plus 5-foot status bonus to speed, and a defensive bonus to allies when their movement triggers reactions within your aura. Mechanically, this does two things at once. It improves your own positioning, letting you reach threats faster, and it protects allies when they reposition, one of the most dangerous moments in combat. This turns movement from a liability into a supported action. Allies can move freely knowing that the Defender has accounted for the risk. By this point in the story, the champion has changed. They're no longer just reacting to danger, they're expected to be where the danger will happen. In towns, people recognize them, not as a warrior, but as someone who just gets results. In battle, allies move with confidence, knowing the Defender's reach is wider and the reactions faster. The shield is no longer just protection, it's a signal. Where this champion stands, the line is drawn, and the fight bends around it. These next choices don't define the role, but they smooth, strengthen, and extend it. Fleet gives you a flat increase to speed, which seems simple, but for a Defender, it can be foundational. More movement means better positioning for aura coverage, faster response to shifting threats, and less reliance on perfect setup at initiative. This stacks cleanly with Blessed Swiftness, reinforcing mobility as a defensive tool. Athletics to Master unlocks reliable physical control, grapple, trip, and shove become more consistent options, larger and more dangerous enemies become manageable, and battlefield manipulation becomes dependable, not hopeful. This is where physical presence starts translating into physical authority. Diplomacy to Master, combined with social feats like Glad Hand and Shameless Request, solidifies the Defender's face role. Mechanically, this allows faster first impressions, more successful social leverage, and fewer penalties for bold or necessary requests. Narratively, this reinforces the idea that this Defender isn't just respected in combat, but they're also trusted in negotiations. Clever Improviser quietly expands the Defender's problem-solving reach. It allows participation in skill actions outside of your training, reducing failure risk when improvising solutions, and greater usefulness in unpredictable situations. This reinforces the idea of a champion who steps in when no one else simply can. The Defender here jumps to a 6 out of 6, Aura expansion, reaction economy, and scaling mitigation push the build to peak Defender performance. Support rises to 5 out of 6 with resistance, movement protection, aid scaling, and aura reach, making this a constant force multiplier. Face climbs up to 4 out of 6 as Master Diplomacy and social feats turn influence into a reliable tool, not a gamble. By level 10, this Defender could shape the battlefield simply by being present. Tier 3 answers the next question. What happens when enemies can no longer leave the space that you can control? This tier doesn't broaden the role spread, it hardens it. Defender reaches its most oppressive form, support becomes reactive, constant, and unavoidable. And face remains stable, but will step back out of the spotlight a little bit mechanically. This is the tier where the Defender stops influencing movement and starts denying it. By the end of this tier, the build can turn all adjacent spaces into hostile terrain for enemies, react multiple times per round to both attacks and positioning, stand up and recover with minimal downtime, and anchor encounters through sheer physical presence. This is the tier where the Defender becomes the immovable standard the party rallies behind. For our must-have selections, these picks take everything you built in the earlier tiers and remove the enemy's remaining escape routes. Divine Wall is a defining moment for the build. When you're wielding a shield, every space adjacent to you becomes difficult terrain for enemies. This means enemies can no longer freely step or stride around you. Repositioning costs actions and movement, and breaking away from your aura becomes inefficient and risky. This stacks brutally well with expanded aura coverage, reaction-based punishment, and ally positioning freedom behind you. At this point, enemies don't just avoid you, they're simply stuck. Divine Reflexes grants you an additional reaction every turn, usable specifically for your champion's reaction. Mechanically, this allows you to punish several enemies in the same round. Your aura pressure scales with enemy count, and ignoring you is no longer a viable strategy. Combined with Quick Shield Block and Glimpse of Redemption, you now function with an action economy, not a reaction limit. This is where the Defender becomes relentless. Athletics to Legendary isn't about tricks, it's about certainty. At this proficiency, Grapple, Trip, and Shove succeed reliably. Here, physical control becomes an expectation, not a gamble. This matters because enemies are already struggling to move away. Now, they struggle to just move at all. The line doesn't just exist, it holds. At this stage of the story, the champion has stopped chasing improvement. Now, they embody it. Where they stand, enemies hesitate. Not because they fear pain, but because they know escape will cost them more than staying ever would. The shield is no longer just protection, it's a boundary. Those who cross it are offered redemption once. Those who refuse find themselves contained, judged, and answered again and again. This is no longer defense as a reaction, this is defense as the authority. These next choices ensure that the Defender remains standing, responding, and supporting, no matter how brutal the encounter becomes. Sanguine Tenacity hardens the Defender against attrition. It reduces the impact of Enfeebled and Drained, granting resistance to persistent bleed damage, and makes recovery from bleed faster and more reliable. This ensures that long fights favor you, attrition strategies fail, and the Defender doesn't slowly degrade under pressure. You don't just stop damage, you begin to outlast it. Fast recovery ensures that even when conditions do land, they don't linger. It improves recovery from disease and poisons, and reduces drain severity during rest. This is endurance not just in combat, but across the entire adventuring day. Acrobatic scaling plus kip up means standing from prone no longer costs actions, no longer triggers reactions, and knockdowns lose their power against you. This is critical because enemies will try to put you on the ground once they realize they can't go around you. And now, even that doesn't work. Group Aid turns teamwork into force multiplication. One successful aid can support multiple allies, you provide value even when not directly attacked, and support scales with party size and coordination. Narratively, this reinforces the idea that this Defender doesn't just protect individuals, they elevate the whole group. The Defender here stays at a 6 out of 6 with Battlefield Denial, Reaction Economy, and Physical Control peaking here. Support holds at 5 out of 6 as multiple reactions, group aid, mitigation, and recovery turn the Defender into a constant force. Face remains at a 4 out of 6. While not the focus of this tier, social authority remains reliable and respected. By level 15, enemies could no longer ignore the Defender. They couldn't move freely, they couldn't escape the line. Tier 4 asks the final question. What happens when every hostile action is not just punished, but answered immediately and decisively? This tier doesn't introduce new roles, it perfects the existing ones. Defender reaches inevitability. Support becomes automatic and omnipresent. And Face transforms into authority that can halt conflict outright. This is no longer about control, this is about consequence. By the end of this tier, the build can counteract enemies every time they trigger your protection, act more often than enemies expect, sometimes more than once per round, maintain full defensive posture without spending actions, and influence entire crowds or stop violence with a single declaration. This is the Defender at its most complete, not just holding the line, but enforcing it. Our must-have selections here are picks that turn every enemy action into a liability. Blessed Counterstrike completes the Defender's core loop. Whenever an enemy triggers your champion's reaction, you can immediately strike back, dealing extra damage. And if that strike hits, the enemy gains weakness to all strikes from you and your allies until the start of your next turn. This means enemies are punished for attacking protected allies, their decision creates a damage vulnerability for the entire party, and your reaction now advances offense as well as defense. This turns protection into momentum. Enemies don't just regret attacking, they create opportunities for their own defeat. Swift Retribution ensures you are never left behind after reacting. When an enemy triggers your champion's reaction, you become quickened on your next turn, gaining an extra action you can use to either move forward or strike that enemy. Mechanically, you keep pressuring after reacting. Enemies can't disengage after triggering your defenses, and your action economy scales with enemy aggression. This removes the final weakness of reaction-based builds, which is falling out of positioning after responding. Shield Paragon is the capstone of the shield-focused defender. While wielding your blessed shield, your shield is always raised. You never need to spend an action to maintain full defense, and if the shield were to ever be destroyed, it instead retreats and returns repaired. Mechanically, this means permanent shield block readiness, 0 action tax for defense, and near immunity to shield attrition. At this point, defense is no longer something you do, it's just something that you are. By now, the Defender no longer needs to chase danger, danger comes to them. Enemies know what happens when they strike. Retaliation, exposure, judgment. Allies know that movement, courage, and action are safe while the Defender stands. And sometimes the fight will never even begin. A raised voice, a single declaration, a moment where violence hesitates and then stops. This champion no longer protects because they must. They protect because their presence changes outcomes before the blades are even drawn. These choices ensure the Defender's authority extends beyond combat and never fades under pressure. Heroic Presence is battlefield leadership distilled. With a single action, you grant multiple allies significant temporary hit points, strong protection against mental effects, and unshakable conviction. This means party survivability spikes instantly, morale-based effects are neutralized, and allies fight longer and harder under your presence. Narratively, this is the Defender as a symbol, courage made tangible. The Define Negotiation suite at Legendary Diplomacy turns the Defender's voice into a tool of resolution. Group Impression, Legendary Negotiation, and Evangelize allow you to influence entire groups at once, call for parley even during hostile action, and impose mental pressure through conviction alone. This enables conflict avoidance at the highest levels, social control equivalent to battlefield control, and face authority that scales into epic play. This isn't persuasion, it's command presence. Robust health ensures that even at the highest levels of play, attrition fails. Battle medicine heals more, recovery downtime shortens, and long adventuring days favor you. This reinforces the Defender's final trait, inevitability over time. The Defender stays at a 6 out of 6 as permanent defense, reaction loops, counterstrikes, and battlefield denial reach their peak. Support jumps to a 6 out of 6 as well, as automatic mitigation, heroic presence, and reaction-based protection makes the party exceptionally resilient. Face rises to 5 out of 6 as legendary diplomacy and mass influence allows conflicts to be either redirected or ended outright. And that's the original Defender. From level 1 to level 20, this build isn't about chasing damage numbers or flashy turns, it's about responsibility. About standing where danger wants to happen. About making every enemy choice cost something. And about proving that a true Defender doesn't just protect the party, they define the fight. If this breakdown helped you better understand what a Defender actually does at the table, or gave you ideas for your own character, go ahead and hit that like button. If you want more builds like this focused on party roles, strong themes, and real table impact, make sure to subscribe. New videos drop regularly covering everything from role breakdowns to full builds like this one. And if you're ready to keep going, check out our Defender Deep Dive, where we take an even deeper look at how defenders interact with the rest of the party and how different builds approach the rules from completely different angles. Until next time, control the dice, alt the meta, and build the legend. I've been Nicholas, your virtual GM. Thanks for watching.